Good afternoon. We're going to get started. My name is Nick Gayeski. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of a company called Clockworks Analytics, and I'll tell you more about what we do. I always like to say a little bit about myself. So I live here in Boston. I have 3 kids and my wife and 2 dogs and 5 gerbils and like 30 fish. So I have nothing else to do in my life. But I have the good fortune to work with many of the organizations represented in this room. For those of you who we don't work with, we do have a booth, so feel free to drop by and check out what we do. And what I'm going to talk about today is this, which is in the agenda, but in particular, those are the kind of keywords that I'll be delving into in more detail. So driving better reliability and performance, dealing with some of the issues that affect all of the organizations we work with, aging infrastructure, shortage of skilled staff, high priority reliability and compliance issues they need to manage so that they can have an environment to do the work that is the mission of the organization they do. And I'm going to use a term called condition-based intelligence, and hopefully by the end of this talk you'll have a shared understanding of what I mean by that, as well as fault detection and diagnostics, and I'm going to use some real-world examples just sort of grounded. These are the simple issues that are affecting performance and reliability. So first, by show of hands, how many of you have heard the term fault detection and diagnostics before? Like, okay, a few. So not many, but a few. So fault detection and diagnostics, very simply put, is finding problems and diagnosing why they exist, hopefully with enough information to do something about it, i.e. fix it. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because without fault detection and diagnostics, we spend a lot of time organizing data, analyzing data, figuring out what the data means, and that time is time taken away from doing something about what the data tells you. So rather than spend so much time figuring out what the data tells you, let's spend our time fixing the problems that we can see in the data. So fault detection and diagnostics is a key tool to help do that. The term's been around for decades. In the built environment, it's been slower to take hold. You'll see more mature applications of fault detection and diagnostics, let's say in the airline industry, but particularly in HVAC, because of the unstructured nature of data and metadata and the customization of every facility, it's taken a very long time for fault detection and diagnostics to be something that can be done at scale. But we are there today, and I'll tell you more about how and why it matters. A little more about us. We work a lot in critical environments. Healthcare is one of our key segments. Pharma, that's why we're here. We also work in medical devices, sort of close cousin. Laboratories, so many of you also have labs, so research side of the organization and the manufacturing side of the organization. Labs, of course, exist in other places like universities. One of the first customers we served, they had 100% outdoor air handlers for a 450,000 square foot facility, and a simple thing like leak by on a chilled water valve could cost them $250,000 a year because these are 100,000 CFM air handlers with a lot of conditioning, and many of you have spaces just like that throughout your portfolios. We got into it primarily because we wanted to help make a difference in energy. And that has turned into, in many ways, an ancillary benefit as we see this evolution of the industrial world, the built world, towards connected assets and leveraging knowledge about connected assets to be smarter about the way that we manage sites. And with all the pressures that we have in the industry, i.e. lack of tradespeople to do the work, lack of skilled engineers who know what to do, I'm sure you all face this in your organizations where you just don't have enough people to solve the problems that you need to solve within maintenance. All right, so now I get into some of the details. this is a very simple diagram of how FDD can be enabled. So in the sites that you work in, you probably have building automation, industrial automation. You may have a data layer. There's many different protocols that you can get this data through and from. So BACnet is common in in buildings generally. OPC is common in industrial automation. There's some other protocols there that are sort of less common in the pharma world. There's also APIs. Increasingly, they're customer proprietary APIs. We've integrated to the Aviva Asset Framework API, for example. I'm getting deep into the weeds, and I apologize if I'm doing that. I tend to do that, so call me out. But the point is, the data's there. There's tons of data, time series data, and it's doing something with that data that's important. I think someone in an earlier talk said, it's not about more data. I mean, I agree with that, right? We don't need more and more data. We need targeted data, and to turn that data into information that we can take action from. So that leads to that. Let's see if the laser pointer works. I can't find it. Oh yeah, there it is. That leads to the middle section there, which is modeling. You probably heard, have any of you heard the term digital twin? Digital twin, yeah. So digital twin got hot for a while. I don't tend to use the word digital twin just because it's buzzy. But we all model, right? Engineers model things. It's about applying metadata to the time series data to the assets that you're monitoring, so that when you do analytics on that, you can create context around it and you can do root cause analysis on what the problems are. So modeling is an essential step. Call it creating a digital twin if you want. To contextualize the time series data that we're getting on these assets so that you can then do something useful with it. Given the AI name in the track, I will comment on one of the amazing things about AI right now is that helping to fill the gap between what is largely unstructured data with a lot of gaps to structured data with a lot of metadata around it. Trained LLMs and other, we use a tool called masked language models, which is a kind of a cousin to large language models. Instead of predicting the most likely next word, you are predicting the missing metadata in that batch of tags or metadata. So a masked language model is a close cousin. And so AI can be extremely valuable in creating these models or digital twins of your physical assets. In the past, you might have to have somebody pour through PDFs and review documents, or look at the building automation device names and points list, or industrial automation or PLC device names and points list, and try to figure out what that means, how it was engineered, how it all comes together. There are now tools to help us do that quickly. So it's more realistic to connect data, apply metadata to it, and take it to the next step. And the next step is running diagnostics, so assessing the health of each of these assets. If you're monitoring an air handler, which we monitor many air handlers, it's do you have a high prevalence of certain types of faults, valve faults, damper faults, control sequence problems, humidity control deviations, any number of things. So monitoring that over long periods of time, you develop a knowledge about the health of those assets, and you can use that knowledge to inform many different aspects of facilities management. So why do that? Before I go into all the ways it can help inform facilities management, here are some of the whys. Firstly, and I'm going to start actually in the upper right, in critical environments, uptime, reliability, and compliance tends to win the day in terms of why. No one in this room wants to have downtime on critical equipment. No one wants to compromise a batch or throw away vaccines that are stored in a cold vault because you had a problem with the assets that serve those manufacturing lines or those spaces. So in this world, that upper right quadrant is really the driver for most of the organizations we work with. Now, it's not the only reason to do it. I think The previous speaker mentioned energy and money falling from the sky, I think you said. Yeah, very good. So, what's that? If you do it right, yeah, doesn't just magically happen. So one of the benefits of proactive maintenance, data-driven, using FDD is energy savings. There's a study, which is not pharma specific, but by Lawrence Berkeley Lab, on the energy savings you can expect from driving maintenance from FDD, and it's pretty strong. 6% in year 1, 9% in year 2, 13% in year 3, and frankly, I throw out years 4 and 5 because I don't think they had a big enough data set. But strong savings with adoption of FDD and driving maintenance activities from that. The bottom left, though, extending asset life, or at least, let's say, right timing asset life, is one that many of the organizations, the capital side of an organization, they'll tell me, hey, if you can help here, that will actually pay for everything else, because the cost of capital replacement is so big that if you can help them optimize their capital plan, that's where the real benefits are going to come from. So it all depends on what part of the organization you're sitting in. And then lastly, maintenance efficiency. So I've mentioned a few times the shortage of skilled labor in HVAC, building automation, maintenance. If you can avoid certain maintenance tasks and spend that skilled labor on high impact maintenance tasks, that's a big win for the organization. It means that those 6 unfilled maintenance jobs that you might want, maybe it's down to 4 or 3. It doesn't generally mean letting people go. People say that sometimes, and who said deferred maintenance before? Yeah, we don't need to talk about letting maintenance people go. There's plenty of deferred maintenance to solve based on greater maintenance efficiency. All right, so I said I would define condition-based intelligence, and this gives you a sense of what I mean by condition-based intelligence. So FDD is diagnosing the health of the asset. If you have knowledge about the health of the asset, how do you use that knowledge in every aspect of facilities management? I think of that, or maintenance. I think of that in these terms, where this knowledge about the health of an asset can be used in many different ways. Day-to-day operations, of course. Asset condition assessment is another. I don't know, does anyone do facility condition assessments the way that they do, let's say, in healthcare? Is that something you do? No. Risk management, though. So as I think it's Burkhart, as Burkhart was saying last time, I've seen those risk assessment matrices before with some of our other clients, and man, it is just ripe for being informed by time series data, diagnostics about the health of assets over time. So adding to that, not just the work order history or the history of deviations, but time series data on the prevalence of different types of faults and whether those faults create risk of obsolescence or risk of future deviations. I mean, that to me is extremely powerful with continuous monitoring of time series data. In fact, I noticed on one of your slides it had an HVAC line, and it said no continuous monitoring of the HVAC asset, and it was sort of in bright red, so I was just chuckling that, yeah, I hear you. All right, so I already touched on facility operations and risk. Of course, condition-based maintenance is another one. I'm going to share a case study where I can speak more to that. So this is a case study from a pharma organization we work with. They have 12 sites connected, 78 buildings connected. It's GMP, non-GMP research and office buildings. It's a collaboration between reliability and utilities. There's reliability engineering and the utilities team involved. What we're doing together is taking data from source systems like these, boilers, chillers, air handlers, some of the clean utilities, process water, also the CTUs, the cold storage units. This data is part of a sort of enterprise data architecture. So we're actually, in most cases, not pulling directly from the industrial automation or building automation systems here, but pulling from a data layer. We do work with parts of the portfolio that don't have that data layer, and in those cases, we're connecting directly to things like BACnet to their building or industrial automation. And as I mentioned earlier, so that's the data integration step. As I mentioned earlier, this metadata and modeling, one nice thing about pharma is standards and change control. You know, there's pros and cons to it, but it means that even though they might be esoteric alphanumeric codes, as you probably all know, they should have meaning. They should be structured in terms of the standards of the organization and understanding what's what. So turning data from all these different systems into digital twins with sufficient metadata is doable within pharma and trainable. So training, sometimes you have to train tools for specific regions, like based on languages, or specific even organizations. You can train those models to infer metadata at that step. And then finally, it's the analytics and the AI, so on the top. And I shouldn't say finally, because I'll get to the next step. Analytics and AI is a combination of things. So we use expert systems, which you could say is old-fashioned AI. So that's engineering-based. It's traceable. You can look at what calculations were done. You can understand it. We do use LLMs and agents kind of over top of that. So you can think of having data, metadata, and diagnostics that are all conventional, if you will, but then as a layer above that, being able to automate decision-making or processes with agents that can reason on that, that layer that's been created. Generally, we're not talking about automating those decisions all the way back down into the BAS. We're talking about using those types of automations to surface decisions for people. So presenting what's wrong with the air handler, what's wrong with the chiller, possibly even automating a process to create a work order out of it, or creating some decision trees about what to do when different issues crop up. And that's working with teams, vendors sometimes. It could be the controls vendor, it could be the mechanical vendor, it could be a reliability engineering team, it could be in-house HVAC, it could be a controls group or a controls vendor. But to get the issues that pop up into the right hands so that they can come back and take action on it and fix it. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Just want to make sure that's right. This says 2.5 minutes. Does that sound right? Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. So I'm going to go through some of these. I'm going to skip some of these examples just for time, and then get to the point. So these are just some really in the dirt examples. This is an air handler that's cycling on and off, serving a GMP space. It basically had an overly tight temperature deadband. You might not ever notice it or not really care. Maybe it's not big enough to make a difference until it fails. The point is finding these systematically. So this behavior here is not the way it's supposed to be. This is the position of the valve modulating constantly based on a poor control, and simply loosening the deadband a little bit puts it back into control, which means lowering the wear and tear on the valve actuator. It means a better controlled temperature. It means that the life of that valve is going to last longer. It means less risk of a critical failure because no one really is paying attention to this or knows that it's happening. So being able to detect those kinds of issues systematically across all of the assets, putting priorities to them and getting them into the work queue to get done is what this is all about. This one's small. It's 14,000 euro in energy savings. And I already mentioned the extended valve actuator life and the better temperature control. But as it is with this type of work, it's not one big thing. It's thousands of little things. And how do you systematically monitor and address all of those things as best you can and prioritize which ones are the biggest? In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one, go straight to this. This is another very, very simple one, which is just a unit controlling relative humidity, and the humidity set points, were reversed. no one ever really noticed. That means that the humidification and dehumidification were constantly fighting each other. You know, it was a relatively okay controlled space in terms of relative humidity because they were overcompensating for each other. But you're wearing out the equipment again and creating risk of critical failure down the road, or potentially just degrading control of relative humidity over time. This one's interesting because such a small problem was 55,000 euros in annual energy cost because of the humidification and dehumidification fighting each other. So there's your money dropping from the sky. All right, so key benefits at scale. As I mentioned earlier, avoiding deviations is really the #1 driver. And we work with organizations that, while you can't put a firm number to it, if you reduce the probability of a deviation by some guesstimate percentage, and you know the cost of that deviation is whatever you want to say it is, say it's 100,000, then you can easily attribute some, say 100,000 times the risk that that deviation was going to happen to fixing a problem in advance. So when you're talking to the financial side of the organization, and avoiding deviations and reliability is important, being able to speak that language, even though you can't put hard numbers to it, but you can say, hey, if we fix these types of problems, we're going to reduce the chance of a deviation by 5%, and that deviation's worth 100 grand. It's 5,000 times every time we do maintenance, proactive maintenance on that asset. It's a way to make it worth it to do this kind of work, to be proactive in maintenance. And I think maintenance organizations sometimes struggle to have that conversation with finance, and I think it's important to do it. Even if you have to make your best guess on what the impact is going to be. So yeah, managing deviations is first on the list. Optimizing maintenance and operations. One of the things I want to highlight on this list of things is this one, non-critical instruments managed via calibration on demand, risk managed via FDD. So this is an organization that had strict calibration protocols across lots of instrumentation. GMP instrumentation, they continued doing the standard calibration procedures, but they had applied those same calibration procedures to non-GMP sensors, and being able to rely on the FDD to help do condition-based sort of escalated calibration, or at least validate that they don't need calibration right now, or extend the timeline between calibration. It's a huge savings on labor dedicated to calibration. And what's important there is spending your valuable calibration time on the instruments that matter the most. So it's prioritization again. Energy savings in the EMS strategy. So we talked about that, those small issues adding up to big savings. Related to that was ISO 50001. How many of you do anything with ISO 50001? Anyone? Yeah, a few? Okay. Yep. So, ISO 50001 doesn't necessarily prescribe what your process is, but it does prescribe that you have energy performance indicators, that you have proactive processes to address problems and significant energy users, having continuous monitoring of the data across significant energy users, and a well-defined process to use the insights on the health of those assets to resolve it is big for ISO 50001. It can be central to the strategy for energy management in ISO 50001. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, capital expense savings. So all three of those examples had impacts on either extending the life of a valve, extending the life of air handler components, or other equipment, chillers, boilers, heat exchangers, pumps, so on. All right. The other example I want to quickly give is on aging facilities. So sometimes you may question whether you can apply these types of strategies to older sites. The new sites get all the fancy new stuff, but there's a lot of old infrastructure out there with aging assets, maybe a lot more deferred maintenance, kind of a bigger need. And the point here is just to say there is a way to get out of the status quo of conventional alarm workflows that kind of create a lot of alarm fatigue and noise. Maybe you're not addressing all the alarms that come up. How can you create more context and insight from time series data and FDD to get yourself out of that hole? We worked with a site that was aging infrastructure, had been around for a couple decades, 25, I don't know, I forget exactly how old it was. They had a 12% reduction in energy use and greenhouse gas emission goal. Part of the goal was improving the resilience of those aging assets as well, so mitigating risk. And the results they got out of just driving action with FDD is 30% of their energy goal and 31% of their carbon goal was achieved just by driving operational decisions from FDD. So big potential impact just by managing the site proactively with the data and the insights that it can tell you. All right, so I will close here, which is just to say, big picture, what the benefits are for condition-based intelligence in GMP environments. Common challenges, as we've discussed, maintaining uptime, avoiding deviations, managing compliance, managing reliability. How do we do that in an environment where you don't have enough people to do it? You have other priorities pushing you in other directions, and you've got to sift through the noise of all this data to make smarter decisions. Leveraging solutions like FDD and condition-based intelligence is a key ingredient to that. I also think it is a key ingredient to laying the foundation for the future of how these assets will be managed. So creating that intelligence is not just about the immediate outcomes, it's about the long-term outcomes of having a data layer that enables AI workflows, automation workflows, analytics workflows that can inform multiple aspects of facilities management: capital planning, maintenance management, energy management, risk management and mitigation, and compliance. So I'll close there and open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.